You always come back home. A lot of it's probably because of family, but there's a comfort margin there.
Always had Thanksgiving dinner at my Aunt Helen and my Uncle Elmer's, always. And Sunday afternoons at Grandma Met's were always a great
At the lake
occasion.
in the summertime, skiing and boating and raking leaves in the fall. That was a fun part.
It feels like home. It's the nest. So you get that warm, fuzzy feeling coming back home.
A common occurrence. Families raised in small communities. Kids grow and leave the nest to explore the world. Then there's this unexplained, powerful need from within that finds them back home, visiting or staying to build a nest of their own. Come along as we remind you of the treasures, traditions, and significant historical events of several small communities in Indiana that sometimes fuel the need of going home. In 1835, John B. Chapman named Kosciuszko County after a Polish general, Thaddeus Kosciuszko, who came to America to help the country win its independence from Great Britain.
He was a very famous Polish nobleman who came over to fight with George Washington in the American Revolution and was responsible for a lot of the fortifications at West Point and was actually a very patriotic, wonderful man.
In the 1830s and 40s, Kosciuszko County had a reputation of being a sickly county due to fatal diseases carried in the milk cows. The population also dwindled, with losing hundreds during the Civil War. Also, it's believed that more than 700 Indians were in Kosciuszko County when the white man came in the 1830s, and had been thriving there long before that. By the 1840s, most of the Indians were gone.
That is probably one of the saddest part of our history, is what they call the Trail of Tears was written by a man from Plymouth, Indiana, and that's when they moved the Potawatomis west. A lot of them died. They forced them out of here. They wouldn't pay them till they come to a central place. They come to a central place. Then they held up the money until they had the wagons ready to haul them out. They burnt down the shacks that they had built, and they hauled them west.
Preserving the memory of those who have developed our cities and towns is of critical importance. Without their foresight, drive, and suffering at times, we would not have the fundamental foundations to build on today.
It's okay to leave, but you always want to come back home. That's absolutely true. I've lost my father. My mother is still here, but I even think after I've lost my mother, Warsaw is still going to be home to me.
The orthopedic manufacturing capital of the world. The home of the largest printing press in the world. A very strong agricultural economy. A great place to raise a family and recreate, with 3 lakes and 17 parks. No wonder Warsaw is considered one of the top 100 small towns in America.
I think one of the most unique things that's ever been said about the Warsaw, the community where I grew up, was stated by former Mayor Plank. And he always said that Warsaw, the community of Warsaw, was the spirit of Mayberry with the imagination of Jules Verne. And I think that pretty much encapsulates how most people think about Warsaw.
Being in this county it's very diverse. We are the orthopedic capital of the world. There are 3 large orthopedic companies, which gives us a very good economic base. You have that along with the family values, and it goes hand in hand. So you have some sophistication, and you have some culture, and yet you have the down-home values that I believe are so important in trying to raise our children in a safe environment today.
From a diner where you can listen in on the local gossip, to festival season, with traditional parades and festival activities drawing spectators from the tri-state area. The most popular activity? The lake. Merchants in the surrounding larger cities surrender to the effects of lake season because everyone is at the lake. Ancient glaciers carved more than 100 lakes of clear, sparkling waters. Kosciuszko County makes good use of them all year.
My understanding is the county grows by 50,000 people during the summer months. And it's easy to see. We have 100 lakes to offer. There's a revitalization of the soul, I believe, that comes from being around the lakes, something you always look forward to. The aromas of the lake, you get out of the car and there's just that childlike giddiness and the excitement. We're at the lake, fun's going to begin. Mom and Dad are a little more relaxed, things aren't quite as important. And you still have that, and that is still a big part of our area.
Occasionally you hear disparaging remarks about the summer visitors and that sort of thing, but I just thank my lucky stars that we have those visitors to help us, help support what we have here.
3 literary moguls spent some time in Warsaw. James Whitcomb Riley, who became known as the Hoosier Poet, was a journeying sign painter and lived in Warsaw several times.
He was here as a sign painter, and I can't tell you the exact years, but there is a sign that he painted which is in the Warsaw Library.
The novelist Ambrose Bierce lived with his brother Gus for some time in Warsaw. Bierce was around 17 when he worked for Warsaw's early newspaper. His writing style is akin to Mark Twain's and has been described by critics as America's one genuine wit.
He was one of the very first ones to join the Civil War, join the 9th Regiment. Went all the way through. He got injured at one of the battles, and he wanted to get a discharge, and they wouldn't give it to him. But finally, he did get out, but he never came back to live in Warsaw.
During his high school days, Theodore Dreiser lived in Warsaw. His books, A History of Myself and Hoosier Holiday, recall favorable childhood stories while living in the area.
He didn't attract a lot of attention while I was here, although one of his books is, you can pick, the old-timers could pick people out of that who were, he had described in those books. And Ted Williams, who was part owner of the Times-Union, he knew every one of those characters in that book.
Built in 1870, the county jail in Warsaw, Indiana, served as one of the state's most hardened lockups, with no record of a jailbreak. Now, thanks to the Historical Society, generous donations from area residents, and the help of over 80 volunteers, this jail proudly operates as a museum, showcasing thousands of historic and nostalgic items preserving our earlier days. And for those looking for their ancestors, this building also houses one of Indiana's top genealogical libraries.
We are sitting here now in the bullpen area of the jail. I think it's totally incredible to realize that it was used until 1982. And the story goes that never, ever was there an escape from the jail. And we've had some researchers who try to tend to disprove that fact, but we're still holding on to our claim nobody ever broke out of this jail.
It was customary in the 1800s for the sheriff and his family to actually live alongside the county's misguided. To supplement their income, the wife had an additional role as the matron, providing meals to the inmates.
Looking up at the beautiful open stairway in the sheriff's residence, we feel that probably the architects were trying very hard to define the difference between the starkness of the jail itself, to make a little place of beauty for the sheriff's family to live. I had a volunteer one time who said that if her husband had been elected sheriff, there would have been a divorce the very next day because of the 3 stairs going up all the way to the 3rd floor, and the fact that the sheriff's wife was the matron and had to cook all the meals for the kids, or for the inmates, as well as for the kids in her own family, all the policemen that might happen to be gathered around, the sheriff's deputies, whoever else, you know, newspaper reporters. I don't think they had TV back at that time, but she did supply the meals to all of them.
Living in the sheriff's quarters, although beautifully designed to provide as much privacy as possible, did not always ward off the element of danger. John Dillinger held up the Warsaw Police Department in the 1930s, injuring policemen and stealing bulletproof vests and guns.
The Chicago policeman who had been pursuing him for months before he was actually shot had been in cohorts with the sheriff here, and often the sheriff would keep these policemen, Chicago policemen, up on the 3rd floor of the sheriff's part of this jail while they were combing the countryside looking for Dillinger. And then after he was shot, the policemen were afraid of retaliation by the Dillinger gang. So the sheriff, and I believe his name was Pearson, took these 2 policemen to Lake Wawasee and stashed them away at the South Shore Inn in Wawasee. I think they stayed there for 3 or 4 weeks until the heat was off and they felt it was safe to go back to Chicago. A couple years ago, a little old lady, a little white-haired lady from Illinois came in the front door, and she told me that she was the daughter of the Warsaw policeman who had been hit over the head when John Dillinger held up the Warsaw Police Department. And she told me that her dad, she could remember her dad sitting on their front porch, rocking back and forth, and that his head was swathed in white bandages. He had had a concussion after Dillinger had hit him on the head. And when she told me that, I actually got goosebumps. It was so neat to be able to talk to this little old lady who could remember this very historic event in the life of Warsaw.
No matter if you're 4 or 94, you can find something in the 3 floors of the Kosciuszko County Old Jail Museum and Library that will inspire and intrigue. Whether it's pieces of history or the stories of the visitors and volunteers, this museum strives to share and preserve our heritage. Gardens and plants referenced in the Bible have had great spiritual and medical importance, along with inspiring and educational stories. The Warsaw Biblical Gardens, which is the largest of 5 similar gardens in the United States, have nurtured and researched up to 108 biblical species, representing the diverse climates found in Israel. The meadow filled with flowers. A brook represents the 6 wet months of the Israeli year. The orchard, consisting of various fruits of the Bible and a hand-constructed grape arbor. Large shade trees and plants are maintained in the forest. At the end of the brook's wet part is a small desert, representing the drier areas and plants named in the Bible, and the crops area maintains over 30 types of vegetables and herbs.
You read through the Bible and it's like, ooh, here's this book of stuff, and what's this plant or what's that plant? It only grows over there. One of the stated goals in starting this garden was to show people that, hey, you know, lots of these species, not only do they grow here, but they can be grown here in a very healthy manner.
Some plants in the Warsaw Biblical Gardens seem out of place. However, many are as common here as they were in the Holy Land. With ongoing research into the value of these plants, it has been discovered that at least 80% are medically useful.
About 80% of the species that are in here are very useful to either the human stomach or the human well-being or the human emotional state. So there's just a wide range. Rather than just the plant, there is kind of this ethos that surrounds the plant that is also worth maintaining.
We have a deep feeling of family here, and that's one of the reasons why we just love it here, and I think that's the reason why everybody likes it here. It's a tremendous family feeling that makes us stay in Mentone.
Why did the chicken cross the road? To see a 3,000-pound, 12-foot-high egg in Mentone, Indiana, a monument to the egg.
Many, many years ago, in the early 1940s, Mentone was one of the largest areas in the state, really a several state area, where they exported eggs. Because there was such a big egg population here and so many eggs were produced, we had a rail siding back of this big egg in which they would come to the rail siding and then they would be railed out of town. So because of that, it became the egg basket of the Midwest. Over the years, we don't produce quite as many eggs as we used to, but it is still known as that. In 1941, they came up with the idea of making this big egg as a monument because they used to have egg shows here in town, which would grow a tremendous amount of interest because of the big egg production here.
People as far away as Boston, Massachusetts have been curious about this 3,000-pound egg in downtown Mentone, Indiana.
Needless to say, we get a lot of people who ask us about this egg. I've had a lot of people who have done theses and stories on unusual festivals, and I'll get a call maybe from somebody in Boston, Massachusetts, and they'll say, why do you have a 3,000-pound egg in your downtown? And of course the standard line is, doesn't everybody?
Now there's an opportunity to ask the experts that legendary question. What did come first, the chicken or the egg?
I would probably have to say the chicken came first, and if she laid that one, she knew she had been somewhere, let's put it that way. So we just have so many fun running jokes on this egg that it's been a lot of fun for us. But then it is our little insignia of who we are and what we have done here.
Show me a man who cannot bother to do little things, and I'll show you a man who cannot be trusted to do big things. Lawrence D. Bell, aviation pioneer.
He's a pioneer in aviation, and I'd like to broadcast this, and we're proud of that feat. And especially for him being born in this little town, this little egg town here.
A Mentone, Indiana native who could see above and beyond the egg, Lawrence D. Bell, born the youngest of 10 in 1894, realized his vision taking on flight, creating mechanical birds. Bell's focus and determination over the years earned him the honor and respect of being known as an aviation pioneer. Bell never allowed the responsibility of this reputation to distract him from remembering where he came from.
People looked up a lot to him, but he was still Larry when he came home. And he would always go to his aunts and his cousins and have the apple pie and the coffee with them. And enjoyed visiting with the relatives. And Mentone looked up to him with the fact that he was a little small town boy made good. And I think that was the main thing about it. That he had a dream and he worked on it, you know, and worked it into his life. He endowed several amounts of money for, well, one for the library, the public library, as well as the school library. Came back and he and his friend bought a tombstone for a friend simply because he didn't have any. So he just was very good at relationships at home as well as anywhere else. So.
In January 1910, Lawrence and an older brother, Grover, were inspired by the first major U.S. air show near Los Angeles after the Bell family moved to Santa Monica, California. So inspired, they returned home to Santa Monica and built a plane of their own. Even though it was only a model, it flew. It also changed the lives of the Bell brothers from that point on.
Of course, he was the grease monkey. Bell was, Larry. And I think he was more or less worked on planes more than Grover did, maybe. He was more the pilot. And he admired him, I know, a lot.
And he was always on the go, 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 go. And he didn't sit back. And everything that he had heard or seen, he put up in his mind. He did not slack off.
A month before Larry graduated from high school in 1912, Grover, who learned to fly, asked him to work with the great stunt pilot Lincoln Beechey and himself as a mechanic. After Larry passed the final examination, with flying colors, he took up with the two, becoming passionately involved with his work. Beechey quit temporarily, but that did not deter the Bell brothers from attending air shows and learning. Unfortunately, in 1913, Grover was killed in a crash, causing Larry to quit aviation.
After his brother was killed, he was very discouraged, and a man wanted him to help build some floats that they could land on the water. And he wasn't interested till he found the man had been at his brother's funeral and was fired because he attended the funeral, took the day off. So he decided if he was that much interested in everything, he would help him out. And he became involved, and lots of encouragement from friends.
Larry was 20 when he became a shop foreman, moving up within a few short years to vice president and general manager of the Martin Company in 1928. Then he left to join Consolidated Aircraft in Buffalo, New York. After Consolidated moved to California in 1935, Larry formed his own corporation in New York, Bell Aircraft Corporation, where in the first 20 years, the company recorded 20 aviation firsts, of which Larry received many prestigious honors, as well as having schools and parks named after him.
He had an outstanding bunch of engineers that he had picked up from Martin Company and the Consolidated Company. Got them all together, got their heads all together, and they come up with a great foundation for aviation. It fascinates me that he could, his little company, one little company, could do all these things.
He experimented with things, you know, like the guns that he put in the nose of the airplanes and things like that. He could foresee some things that were needed, and he fulfilled the needs for those things. And of course, right at that time, they needed those with World War II.
Arthur Young, born in 1905, was a mathematician, engineer, astrologer, philosopher, author, and the most significant single figure in the development of the Bell helicopter. Young's experience of making sailboat models as a boy began his work in making model helicopters. He labored at these models for 19 years, 12 on his own and 7 with Bell Aircraft Corporation. In 1941, Young assigned his patents to Bell Aircraft. Among these patents were the stabilizer bar, skids, and the familiar bubble. 5 years later, in 1946, Young's helicopter, the Bell Model 47, was awarded the world's first commercial helicopter license.
Arthur Young went to these several different companies, and they thought he was crazy. You know, that little thing up there with a couple of things going around, wing going around, it didn't make sense to anybody. But Larry Bell, he said, we'll do it. And they did. He assigned him 3 men. They had like a little sewing machine engine in it, or a motor in it, a little electric motor in it, with a long rod on it. And that's how they experimented with this thing. They were kind of scared of it, didn't know what it was going to do. That's how they started with a helicopter. And then they came into it and they started building them.
Among the 20 aviation firsts, such as the world's first commercial helicopter and the nation's first jet-propelled airplane, Bell was credited for the first supersonic airplane, the Bell X-1. This was the plane piloted by Chuck Yeager, which broke the sound barrier October 14th, 1947.
You know, they had these rockets, Germany had these rockets that hit London and so forth. Well, they couldn't get a man to go in a ship to go through the speed of sound. So we had a little army man named Charles Yeager. He volunteered. He was a lieutenant then, I believe. And so anyway, he went on up, and they painted his ship, the XS-1, they painted it orange. The engineers said, well, we'll be able to see that when it gets way up there at 20,000 feet, whatever. But the engineers couldn't find it. It went up there and they couldn't find it. It just disappeared on them, and pretty soon they had a loud bang, a loud boom. And the engineer down on the ground, that thing exploded. So they gave up hope on him. And here, just in a few minutes, it took quite a few minutes to get down. He just kept circling in the air. And he got down, and they had a lot of good cheers for him. He went through it. That was a great experiment, and it was a great success on Larry Bell's part.
Vietnam and Korean War veterans were also touched by this man's dreams. Reverend Will Lawson Sr., a board member of the Bell Museum, says it best about the Huey helicopter and the vets who spent time with it. Old friend, I knew when I heard your sound coming through the jungle sky, even before I could see you, that you were bringing supplies, reinforcements, or just maybe you were going to take me home.
Vietnam was full of jungles, and every one you have a little clearing here and there. And our planes would land, it would bring boxes of supplies and pick up the wounded and take off, all within about a minute or a minute and a half. And Well, the Viet Cong discovered this, and they were putting cables across, so that would cause our ships to crash. So they immediately designed a knife on top of the windshield. Then they had one come from underneath, a real sharp knife. They're probably about 14, 16 inches long. And with a jet engine like this, they just came in and they got just under it a little bit. They pulled up with that, 2,200 horsepower or whatever it is. And they come up, they snapped the cable. They just went right on down, picked up the wounded and got out. So we were ahead on this one. Vietnam veterans come in, and some of them with tear-dry eyes as they reminisce of what they have been through. Some of them were pilots or spotters. Some of them were on stretchers. His ships were real strong in the Korean War. He had what they called a Model 47 and a D and a G, and they used them for medical evacuations. And you've probably seen this program MASH, and you see them with a little bubble on it, and that was a later model, and they could carry two wounded on the stretchers to carry them out of harm's way and carry them to a hospital.
Larry Bell and his engineers have left behind designs that will affect our lives well into the future. The Bell Aerospace Agena rocket engine, built in 1957, is known as the workhorse of the space age. It has flown more than 360 times on 20 different missions, including the Discoverer, Ranger, and the Gemini. It also carried into space auxiliary satellites and has sent spacecraft to the Moon, Mars, and Venus. Larry Bell died in 1956 after serving 44 years in the aviation industry, becoming the Dean of American Aviation as a result. Mentone is proud to carry on Bell's legacy by maintaining his personal memorabilia that was donated to Mentone, Indiana in his will to be preserved and shared within the Bell Museum.
It was given in his will to the town. And it's his personal things. That it's not like any other museum we have, because it's his personal collection. And so it means quite a bit to us here in town that it was, his, and he wanted us to have it.
We have what I call Leave It to Beaver residential streets here in town, with the canopy over them, the trees, and the curbs and all that. And that's what I grew up with, and we don't dare let that go by the wayside. We have to retain that for our kids and our grandkids coming up.
Syracuse was plotted and settled in 1836 by entrepreneurs Samuel Crossan and Henry Ward. They came into town with the idea of building a flour mill. They thought that with all the water combined in Syracuse and Wawasee lakes, they could put the mill in Syracuse, grind grain, and make a lot of money. 2 years after building it, a flood washed it away. However, this did not stop the town of Syracuse from flourishing.
You had entrepreneurs who thought that there would be a market for town land. Now, the country land was sold off by the Federal Land Office in Fort Wayne. Farms, 160 acres at a shot, 80 acres at a shot. And basically that was a different business. But then you had a town that would accumulate around these farms because these farmers needed the amenities that a town would offer. A mill, a post office, the basic facts of life. So that's how towns got started here.
William Edward Long was born in Tippecanoe City, Ohio. A self-motivated young man leading a simple life, he moved on to Chicago. He got involved in advertising, and he also invented a bread wrapping machine.
He got a patent on the bread wrapping machine, in which he got an insignificant amount of every loaf of bread that was wrapped. But my word, there is a lot of bread wrapped every day, thousands of loaves of bread. So he became an immensely wealthy guy. In 1932 and 33, he became infatuated with the Chicago Century of Progress, which was the celebration of Chicago's 100th anniversary. And they had this big kind of World's Fair there. And among the exhibitors at the World's Fair was the Empire of Japan. And they had a Japanese tea house, and all the accoutrements of Japanese culture there. And when the World's Fair shut down, Ed Long bought the Japanese tea house and another couple of buildings and moved them out to here.
Brought it down and put it on this island behind his house on Kale Island, and made gardens. He had 4 full-time gardeners, and these islands were all beautifully landscaped all along the road where we live, which is Pickwick Park Drive. He had flower gardens all along the road.
He ran it as a tourist attraction. You know, he would have people in there Friday and Saturday night to the tea house and, you know, welcome aboard and that kind of thing. Well, cripes, I mean, what happens then? Well, Japan invades Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. We don't like Japan anymore. So he renames it. He names it the Chinese Tea House. And it's, you know, it's alternately called the Japanese Gardens from old timers or the Chinese Gardens. The Chinese didn't have gardens.
It was he that came up with the idea of the Pickwick Block originally back in the 1930s. And it's still called the Pickwick Block today. Apparently he named it that, I guess. But there is a street named for him, W. Long Drive, and it goes past Lakeside Park. And Lakeside Park is a result of W. Long. That was the city dump. Where Lakeside Park is today, you know, they threw refrigerators and cars and stuff away there, and he helped raise funds locally. I don't know how much he gave of his own. It doesn't matter. He helped raise funds locally to get that turned into a park, and gave it to the city then as a park. So he had a lot of energy and a lot of great ideas.
The Syracuse Turkey Creek Library houses the Syracuse Wawasee Historical Museum, founded in 1987. Among its treasures is the only known 1905 Meyer automobile, designed and built by a local resident. This car traveled a lot on its own before ending up in the museum.
When we found out about the museum, we knew about this car, a 1905 Meyer, that my grandfather, Sheldon Harkless, had designed. And he designed it, built one, and then the Meyer Carriage Company in Ligonier took it over. He sold the rights to it or something. And they built, I think 10 or 12. Well, my dad, years ago, found the original one in a museum in Sarasota, Florida. And a few years after that, Harry and I were down there, and we looked it up. It was there, this old black thing, you know. We thought, well, that's interesting. And then when the museum started, we thought, wouldn't that be great to have that car there? Because my grandfather's shop was just a block down the street. So we contacted the museum in Sarasota, and they said, no, they had sold it. So Harry contacted them. No, they sold it to one of the casinos in Las Vegas. So Harry flew to Las Vegas and found the car. It had been restored. So the museum bought it and brought it back here.
The steamboat period on Syracuse and Wawasee lakes occurred between 1875 and 1915, bringing competition between several steamers. Frank Reith brought Modoc to Lake Wawasee from the Elkhart River. In 1877, the Roxy set sail on Syracuse Lake with Abraham Jones at the helm. The competition between the boats was evidenced by the introduction of the Daisy. In August of 1885, Mr. Jones, who operated the Modoc, had the fireman of the Daisy arrested for assault and battery because of fighting between the two.
The steam engine was a fascination of our society beginning in the 1830s and 40s, but they began to use them commercially in the 60s and 70s. One reason we had steamboats here was there was a family came down here from Wheeling, West Virginia to run the pump station for the B&O Railroad to pump water into the locomotives. And they ran steam engineers. Their name was Jones. And the Joneses set up the pump station, and then their son, who had the strange name of Admiral Paul Jones, I mentioned that the other day, that was his given name, built a steamboat called the Anna Jones and ran it around Wawasee. And steamboats prevailed until the 90s when you had gasoline engines come along. They were much more efficient. You didn't have to have coal. You didn't have to start a fire. You had steam fire engines until the 1915s.
Although not a steamboat and still very young, the SS Lily Pad, a 65-foot double-decker boat, is carrying on the traditions of cruising the shoreline of Wawasee and Syracuse. The historical significance is where the Lily Pad is docked. A Syracuse-Wawasee favorite haunt called the Frog has been in operation since the early 1930s.
If you go back to the early 1930s, of course, Prohibition ended. You know, and theoretically running liquor was not legal until 1933. There was a fellow named Charlie Dalkey, D-A-L-K-E, who in the 1930s decided to become an entrepreneur, and he equipped an old school bus in the winter to go out and sell supplies to ice fisher people on the lake. He would drive around on the lake when it was frozen and sell booze and food and supplies to these guys. And he eventually accumulated enough money to start the Frog Tavern.
The Frog has been here for over 60 years, so that means 3 generations of family have come through the Frog, and they like the old Frog. Many of the grandparents, they had met many of them at the Frog, and got married and brought their family in and so on and so forth. So I have heard many a story of the now adults that have kids coming in here by boat, dropping their kids off on the patio to throw bread at the ducks and fish and have a sandwich and stuff, and then they go in the air-conditioned inside, and the kids' nose on the window, "When you coming out, folks? When you coming out?" And they said it was good enough for us as kids, it's good enough for them. But so that, yeah, there's a lot of tradition here at the Frog, and we're trying to do the same thing with the SS Lily Pad, now in its 4th year.
Standing 2 stories high, 65 feet long, and 16 feet wide, the SS Lily Pad provides a unique vessel for family reunions, weddings, corporate parties, and historical tours.
When I first brought this down the channel, people looked at it with somewhat of a jaundiced eye that first year, thinking that this was going to be nothing more than a party barge. I was going to take a bunch of drunks from the Frog out in the middle of the lake. They're going to throw their beer cans and cups over the side, and there was going to be so much noise out there that nobody could sleep at night. Well, it took me about a half a season to overcome all that and to show them that what we're really doing is something for the community. We have a historian who happens to live in Muncie now, but he is truly a lake historian that comes on, and he will fully narrate from the time we leave the pier the history of everything from the Frog to the other excursion boats to the channel, and then once we get out on the lake, we run 200 feet offshore at 10 miles an hour. It takes us 2 hours to get around the lake, and he gives current color and goes back to the turn of the century in history. And it tends to be something that is very special that people just don't forget.
No matter where you live, when you're gone from your home environment for more than a week or 2 at a time, it's always great to get back home.
North Webster never got to be on a railroad, so it was tough to get to. So it didn't really develop until the automobile, until the 1920s and 1930s. And then people began to drive up from central Indiana to North Webster. And the Barbee chain developed in the same way. You know, it was easier to get to from Fort Wayne, Muncie, Indianapolis, Anderson, Marion, and so on. So you got this population growth in the 20s and 30s.
With only 9 miles of shoreline, Lake Webster in North Webster, Indiana, was known to have a history of excursion boats. Wooden, steam-powered paddle boats, with such names remembered as the Ethel H. 45 feet long, she sailed between 1899 and 1908. In 1902, the Cuban Girl, of 25 feet in length, spent a summer season on Lake Webster. A professional steamboat captain on the Ohio River visited Lake Webster riding the Ethel H., Joseph Breek. He retired in 1906, taking on Lake Webster as his home. In 1908, he built a 30-foot stern wheeler and christened it the City of Webster.
The City of Webster stopped anywhere around the lake and picked up people and sold their groceries and whatever they needed to do. And then City of Webster grew old, and they built a lot bigger, a lot nicer boat, and they named it the Dixie.
Mr. Breek and some carpenter friends, using the good wood from the City of Webster, built a 58-foot stern wheeler that set sail in 1914. This became the first Dixie. Because this Dixie had a wooden hull, she deteriorated quickly. Captain Breek then had a steel hull made in St. Louis, and salvaging as much wood as possible from the original Dixie, the Dixie II was built in 1929 and is still sailing on Webster Lake today.
The Dixie is actually driven by the paddle wheel. The first engine on it was a Model T engine, and nowadays, actually in the late 30s, they put a generator in there, and is running that's how we run the paddle wheel still today. And it's the real thing. It's the Dixie that was built in 1929.
It was in 1959, during Ernest Tag Huffman's reign as a Dixie owner, the blinking lights tradition started. The Webster Lake residents blink their lights at night, and the Dixie answers back. This all started when the first mate had to work one night and disappointed his girlfriend by breaking a date. Now, she didn't believe that he had to work, so he arranged for the captain to blink the lights when cruising past her house. Well, the tradition continues today, along with many others.
There was a person that said to me once that in a way you don't own the Dixie, he said, in people's mind around here. You get to do the payments and keep it up, but everybody else think it belongs to them, because that's how important the Dixie is to everybody around here. And you can see it very much, because when we go around the lake, there's a lot of traditions that is kept up by everybody. In the evenings, people come out to their beachfront and they flash their lights, and we flash our lights back. And it takes a lot to do that every time we go by, and they do it. Most people around the lake do that, and during the day they come out and wave at us, and we honk the horn at them, and all the kids run out on the pier and yell, "Hi, Dixie!" And if the captain misses somebody, very often they call us and say, "Why don't you do that anymore?" and so on. That's how much people care about the Dixie.
The current owners of the Dixie migrated to North Webster from Denmark to start an amusement park. They became friends with the previous owner of the Dixie and actually helped out with her. When the opportunity came to buy the Dixie in the early 90s, they took it.
North Webster is an extremely friendly town. I can't believe how well we have been received here. You always have the feeling that you have more friends than you have time for, and that's great. I have to say too, it's fun to drive the Dixie. It's rewarding to drive the Dixie, because she gets to you and she gets into your blood somehow.
If these walls could talk. With patrons such as Carol Lombard, Clark Gable, Al Capone, and Babyface Nelson, the 100-year-old Barbie Hotel, located between Warsaw and North Webster, still has a legendary reputation.
It's been here 100 years. It had a fine reputation. You'll run into people in Indianapolis, Chicago. We were out at the Hotel Del Coronado in California looking at its pictures, and I was saying my hotel's getting ready to have its 100-year anniversary, and the lady sitting back beside me, the Barbie Hotel in Indiana? People just know about it from all over. It has quite a reputation, and it just seemed like a natural fit. There's a gentleman that I have not met. I have 2 chefs that have met him at different times, and he promises to come back and bring the book that's written about the Barbie Hotel. He's 78 years old, and right across the street was a gas station, bait shop, and it was that up until just the last 5 years. But it had been there for 100 years as well. And he would say, "Young man, I remember sitting on my papa's hood of his car, watching the black cars come down the street, slopping around in the mud," and he says Capone would get out of his car and walk in, and all the other people in the hotel would come carrying their bags out. And he said they'd stay for a week or 2 when it got hot in Chicago, and then they would leave. Dillinger robbed a bank in Kosciuszko County, and it was believed he came back out to here afterwards. How much of this is true, you don't know, but he was in the area.
When guests are staying at the hotel, it isn't unusual for the staff to know them on a first-name basis and to hear stories about several generations of family traditions taking place there. The Barbie Hotel, Restaurant and Grill is the last of the great hotels that the lakes in Kosciuszko County had on them. The others have been torn down, burned down, or fallen down. This one is here to stay.
The people that come to eat here request to have their dinner in this dining room. They talk about the years when it burned, these solid foot-thick fieldstone walls. Back behind us, we have a welcome to the lake, fish on the wall. That's been here as long as I've been here, certainly, and past that. People remember that. They walk in and it's like, we're here, it's going to be good. Sit back, relax, enjoy yourself. We're back home again.
I was not a boy in Muncie. I was too busy to be a boy in Muncie. I was a boy at Wawasee.
Eli Lilly, a Civil War Union officer and the founder of Eli Lilly and Company, gave Wawasee its start as a resort area. He, along with some friends from Indianapolis, discovered this beautiful lake area and built the Cedar Beach Clubhouse in the late 1880s after the railroad came along.
The railroad was what developed Wawasee, because there was a railroad from Indianapolis to Goshen. And then all of a sudden you have a railroad from Pittsburgh to Chicago. So between the two of them, with the connections, you can easily get to Wawasee. And that's when Wawasee began to be a resort.
Kosciuszko County in the 1920s and 30s was enhanced by tourism, which centered on Lake Wawasee. The Spink Arms Hotel offered all types of gambling. Slot machines and dance halls lured tourists and Chicagoland gangsters to the area. When the law cracked down on gambling, tourism washed away.
Sargent's Hotel, Wawasee Hotel, Crow's Nest, South Shore Inn, and Oakwood. All those were in the summertime from June until September. Were very active, and most of the people made their living by that. The grocery stores, although there were grocery stores on Wawasee Lake as well, but a lot of the merchants depended on that business.
These were weekend people, these were convention people. And where did you go for a convention in the 1930s and 1940s? You know, there weren't resorts all over Christendom to do that. So you came to Wawasee, and you were here 2 or 3 days, and you brought a bunch of money and you gambled. There was an orchestra there every night. The food was good, and the trains came right within a block of where they were, and they met you with the station wagon and took you to the train. And you know, this was a wonderful way of life.
But those were the golden days up there on Wawasee as far as hotels, restaurants, and the groceries those were the golden. When the gambling left, pretty well closed down.
Waco, or the Wawasee Amusement Company, which was on the south shore of Lake Wawasee, had the privilege of showcasing some of the biggest performers in the big band category. Cab Calloway appeared in June 1933 with 4,000 in attendance. July 1941 brought Glenn Miller and his band with Bob Eberly, and it's reported that 7,000 to 10,000 people attended. Hoagy Carmichael played during the month of August. Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians appeared in May 1949. Ted Weems and Woody Herman also graced the community during that time. In June of 1950, Ted Weems was the last of the big bands to play at Waco.
People were parked along 13 all the way from North Webster to Syracuse to walk to Waco to hear Cab Calloway. Glenn Miller was just another orchestra leader. And in those days you had the Dorsey brothers.
Armstrong, Miller. I worked out there during the summertime. I worked for free. So I worked the soda bar. And Armstrong, I remember both Armstrong and Miller. Glenn Miller, there wasn't room to dance. There's so many people.
The Lilly family and Commodore Wright from Columbus, Indiana, started the original Wawasee Yacht Club back in the early 1800s, which only survived for about 10 years. Then, in the 1930s, day sailors from the surrounding area built up the Wawasee Yacht Club again on land provided by the Lilly family.
These were guys from Fort Wayne, Goshen, and they built a dormitory over on the south side of Wawasee, away from the lake. All they had on the lake was a pier. And that was the Wawasee Yacht Club for many years, and I think it still is.
In June of 1890, the Wawasee Yacht and Canoe Club hosted its first regatta. 2 silver cups, one for the yachts and one for the sailing canoe contest, were acquired. There were 7 boats entered in the yacht competition. The sailing canoe race consisted of a rival between 2 people, one from Chicago, the other from Indianapolis. This was the first and last contest between sailing canoes.
The time that we were having the Snipe Nationals, or the Great Lakes Snipes, and a storm came up and it blew everybody over. And I wasn't old enough to go out and pull anybody in, but my dad and my sister went out there and they pulled in a couple of guys from Chicago whose boat had been overturned, and we got them in and we dried them out on the front porch in front of the fire, and all of a sudden this guy says, "My watch, my watch." And he had gotten a graduation present from Northwestern when he graduated, and he had left it in his shoe. And we went out and we found the boat, and we found the shoe, and we found the watch. You know, these are wonderful experiences.
We love the lake. Of course, being raised on the lake, you know, I'm not happy unless I can see water out in front.
Winona is said to be an Indian word meaning beautiful. Appropriately, the Miami and the Potawatomi Indians used the beautiful shores of Winona Lake as a summer resting place, moving on in the fall and winter, not unlike the activities of the white settlers that came along. In 1895, Solomon Dickey, the president of the Indiana Synod of the Presbyterian Church Christian Education Department, was looking for a place where he could have a summer resort, a place where Sunday school workers and teachers could come and recharge. While on a train to Washington, D.C., he met a man by the name of Mr. J.E. Beyer. The two struck up a conversation about Mr. Dickey's Christian resort idea.
Mr. Beyer just happened to own about 400 acres that surrounded this beautiful little lake in northern Indiana, known as Eagle Lake at the time. They had been developing a park and some different Chautauqua ideas, and through the conversation, basically by the time they got off the train, they had a commitment from the buyers to donate and lease and sell cheap some of the land, and Dickey was going to come there and develop a resort for Christian workers. And so in 1896 they came and started developing some of the buildings that were erected, and from there it developed into the second largest Chautauqua in the world, with summer attendances of about 250,000 people by 1910.
In the 1870s, the Chautauqua, founded in Chautauqua, New York, was based on 4 principles: education, religion, culture, and recreation. The goal of its founders was to be able to provide a recharging opportunity for Christian workers. In the early 1900s, as many as 300 Chautauquas were going on throughout the United States. This model still operates today.
It was bringing culture, it was bringing a lot of the opportunities that people on the East Coast especially had to smaller communities and communities that were maybe out of the way. Certainly Winona Lake, Warsaw area is not in the mainstream of culture through the history of the United States. But it was a place where the well-known performers, the well-known entertainers could come and for a few hours or a few days impart their particular wisdom and their particular discipline to the folks that were here. And it was a real opportunity, especially in those days where people were less mobile than they are today.
While one of the Chautauqua's founding ideals was religion, Winona Lake took that ideal to another level by starting the Winona Lake Bible Conference in the late 1890s, drawing the most influential speakers from around the country. Although the attendance doesn't compare to the early days, Grace College and Seminary took over the conference institution in Winona Lake in 1968, ending in 1988.
It was a week to 10 days long, and it would be like today having a week-long conference that had James Kennedy and James Dobson, and Billy Graham, and Norman Vincent Peale, and on down the list, all the great religious leaders of the day there at the same week. It was kind of the pinnacle of religious conferences really around the world. European, especially English and Scottish speakers would be here on a regular basis.
Many famous people have graced Winona Lake. Of them all, Billy Sunday was the most known and the most religious influence in the United States during the early part of the 20th century. He was born November 19, 1862, in a two-room log cabin on his grandfather Corey's farm in Story County, Iowa. Times became very difficult for Billy's family, and his mother very reluctantly sent Billy and his older brother Ed to an orphanage. The two, fortunately, were under good influence during their stay and fared well. When they reached the age limit of the orphanage, 16, they went back to the farm and continued their lives. Billy did attend school at times, but never graduated from high school. He was forced to work for his living. It was in the school of hard knocks and practical experience that he learned what he needed to climb to national prominence. Early on, Billy Sunday was known as the fastest base runner and the most daring base stealer in organized baseball. He learned that playing on a sandlot team in Marshalltown, Iowa, versus playing professional baseball with the White Stockings were two very different worlds.
Sunday, in his early 20s, became a professional baseball player and was very successful. In fact, he was the fastest man in baseball in his day. He was not a tremendously good hitter. In fact, he was a bad hitter. He set a consecutive record for strikeouts his first year in the majors, but he learned to control the bat well enough that he got on base and stole a lot of bases and was very, very good for his team.
Billy Sunday became one of the top baseball stars of the national game. People flocked to see him. All seeming great for Billy, there was something missing in his life. In 1886, Billy had been frequenting the saloons and had grown somewhat wild. He was drawn into a rescue mission after a few drinks by hearing a gospel song that was one of his mother's favorites. So moved, he turned to the boys who were with him and said, "I'm through, boys. We've come to a parting of the ways."
It was a group from the Pacific Garden Mission inviting people to come down to the mission for a crusade that was going on, and for some reason he followed them down there, and for night after night for about a week continued going to those meetings, and it was there that he was converted to Christianity.
Billy was engaged at the time that he met Helen Thompson. As a matter of fact, so was she. But Mrs. Helen Ma Sunday eventually became the business manager and the driving force behind the Sunday organization.
She made a lot of the decisions, and Sunday's job was really just to preach. I guess just maybe is a bad word when you consider how athletic and how draining his sermons were, and considering that he would do that 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a day, it was a significant workload that he carried.
To all you good friends today, Mr. Billy Sunday, the man who has spoken to more people than any other man who has ever lived, and we invite you to join with this great crowd here at Winona in this great day we're having. Mr. Sunday. Folks, I'm going to talk to you a little while this afternoon on the issue.
Billy Sunday got his start in evangelical crusade work with Dr. Wilbert Chapman. Sunday was the advance man for Dr. Chapman for a couple of years. His job was to go out and handle the detail work in getting communities ready for the crusade.
When Dr. Chapman came here in the late 1890s to start that Bible conference, of course, Sunday kept in contact with him, and so by 1900, Sunday was coming here in the summers to kind of take advantage of some of the things that were going on in the resort ideas and the complex that was happening here. He actually rented a house that sat in this very location, and in 1911 decided that he wanted to make this a permanent residence. So the house that was here they picked up and moved across the alleyway, and they built the Mount Hood bungalow here in 1911. Some of the older people can still remember Billy's major contribution during the summer evenings and days was going around with his poker stick and picking up litter around town. So kind of a humble guy. He'd just go around with his bag and his stick and make sure the town looked good and was clean.
Sunday's personality was a dichotomous one. In large social crowds, he was somewhat shy and withdrawn. One-on-one, he could be very engaging, but get him in front of an audience where he was the central focus, and his personality would change.
Because here you could go listen to a guy who would not preach from behind the pulpit, but maybe on top of it. He'd run up and down the aisles, he'd slide across the stage, he'd break chairs to bits as a means of communicating his message, but still as a way to entertain and engage his audience. He wanted to make sure that they understood what he was saying, and so whatever means he could use to communicate that message, to engage his audience, he would use.
The campaign tabernacles were like a city in miniature unto themselves. Inexpensively constructed and not quite up to building code, no insulation or means of fireproofing, these structures could hold up to and beyond 15,000 people. The ingeniousness of their design and placement was the fact that as they were being built on the outskirts of town, the curiosity alone would draw crowds, whether you liked Billy Sunday or not.
People would start talking about, look at this huge building going up, you know, out at the end of Main Street. They just couldn't believe the size of it and how many people were going to be coming. So it was like a built-in advertising. Even if you really didn't like Billy Sunday, or you didn't like the idea of this evangelist coming in to sort of take over your town, your curiosity had to get the better of you to want to go out there and see this huge arena that had been built and this huge crowd that was going to be assembled.
The Billy Sunday revivals did not end with his demise. His crusades lived on and on in the lives of his converts and in the lives that they, in turn, influenced. In Sunday's 39 years of ministry, he conducted about 300 crusades, preaching to nearly 100 million people before his death in 1935.
When you consider that the population of the United States was somewhere around 70 to 75 million at the turn of the century, and Sunday preached to almost 100 million people between 1895 and his death in 1935. It's really a phenomenal record that he had there. And it's something that I think that people need to know, that we need to remember, that there were people like Billy Sunday that were influencing not just the Christian world, but the entire United States by the views that they had, the values that they expounded, and the things that they communicated to their audience. In a sense, you could say that Sunday preached to every person alive in the United States during his 40 years of preaching.
Billy Sunday had friends, but his one true friend was Ma Sunday. He trusted her judgment and relied almost solely on her for making major decisions in his life's work. Because of their work together, others were drawn to Mrs. Sunday to tap into the wisdom and insight that she built up over the years.
She was invited to many conferences and invited to be a speaker at a lot of different activities. And basically what she was doing was recounting the things that Billy had said and recounting his ministry and recounting what had happened throughout his life. And when she died, she wanted to make sure that the house stayed intact to kind of preserve the memory of her husband and the work that he had done. Mrs. Sunday, in this very room, was instrumental in a current evangelist that we have. Billy Graham was here in Winona Lake in the 1940s and spent hours sitting here in the living room talking to Mrs. Sunday, learning what it was that made Billy Sunday's organization so successful. And so a lot of what you see out of Graham's crusade organization is a direct descendant of Billy Sunday.
Since Mrs. Ma Sunday died in 1957, the Sunday home has been maintained as a museum per her request. What makes this museum unique is the guided tour around the original furnishings, gifts given to the Sunday family over the years, and original artwork done by Mrs. Sunday.
There was nothing that had to be reconstructed or collected. That the original collection had been sold off and dispersed. So that's really one of the most important things. The home is filled with gifts to the Sundays, items that were given to the Sundays as presentation pieces. Also, there are a number of items which were actually artistic items that the Sundays made themselves, primarily Helen Ma Sunday. She was an artist and artisan in her own right. She did a number of oil paintings that are here in the home. We're pretty confident in saying that we do have the largest collection of her works. If there's anyone who's interested in the Sunday home and preserving the Sunday home, really the best thing they can do is let their local state representative or state senator know that this is something that's important to them. It's a part of Indiana history, which needs to be preserved. It's a part of national history, which we're lucky enough to have right here in Indiana. And it would be a great asset to have it as part of the state site system.
The conference institution folded in the 1980s, and large employers were moving out of town, creating a time of discouragement within Winona Lake. The town had a majority of vacant commercial buildings and slum apartments. To retaliate, the Historical Society and others combined efforts and started buying properties with the intent of converting them back to single-family homes. In 1991, a small partnership formed called the Winona Restoration Company, which provided the financial involvement to start the restoration of Winona Lake.
I got involved with a new partner, Dane Miller, who's president and CEO of Biomet Corporation. And so that provided the funding that we needed. Basically, everything that's going on now that has happened since 1994, my original plan on that was it would take that long, it would take all of my life to accomplish where we're at now. When I first started out, my business plan was basically a 50-year plan. And by getting somebody like Dane involved who had the heart and the finances to help spur that thing along, it's kind of condensed it into 5 years.
One goal of the Winona Restoration Partners is to return to the community the Chautauqua ideals. In the early Chautauqua years, you could find 50 or 60,000 people coming just to see other people, to share ideas, to bring culture to one another.
Year after year, they'd come and they'd open up their cottage, and their neighbors were the same people, or maybe the sons and daughters or the grandsons and daughters of the original owners of that property. So it was really a place where people would come to meet other people, a place of gathering. We wanted to play on that idea. We wanted to capture that idea and certainly not destroy it.
There is so much more that goes on in Indiana that no one really knows about. It happens without warning. Little pockets of history or a childhood memory that pops up here and there. Hopefully, you'll be there to enjoy the moment. Going home means many things to many people. Pride, identity, foundation, security. These are the things you can count on. These are the things that need to be protected and preserved.
Going Home, Kosciuszko County is made possible in part by grants from the Kosciuszko County Foundation, the community foundation serving Kosciuszko County.
Biomet, headquartered in Warsaw, Indiana, employs nearly 6,000 people and provides musculoskeletal products to more than 100 countries. Its offerings include products for joint replacement, fixation, spine, sports medicine, arthroscopy, dental reconstruction, and more. Biomet participates in efforts to improve the lives of patients worldwide, funding orthopedic research and donating time and implants for the treatment of third-world patients with debilitating musculoskeletal disorders.
And Sprint,